Welcome to the Benson Wealth Podcast. I take complex financial and economic topics and make it accessible to the everyday listener. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Benson Wealth Podcast. My name is Drew Benson. I'm the president and founder of Benson Wealth Management and a senior wealth advisor with Raymond James. I'm also the co-managing partner for True North Wealth Management Group, which is a platform for independent wealth advisors. I'm also a trained macroeconomist and a certified financial planner and wealth advisor. Now, today I interview Dr. Michael Munger, who is a professor of political science at Duke University. Dr. Munger holds a PhD in economics from Washington University in St. Louis. Today we discuss his book, The Sharing Economy, which I don't want to give too much away because it was extremely thought-provoking and you're going to learn a lot during this talk. But I will tell you this. What was fascinating for me is that we may, and one of his premises is that we may be on the verge of another major economic revolution that could rival something like the Industrial Revolution. Now, much has changed in the era of obviously the internet and AI, et cetera. But what he points out is that technologies that you're already interfacing with from companies like Amazon and Uber and Turo and Airbnb, those types of technological advancements and those platforms that they're built on may fundamentally change the way in which you as a consumer work with or engage durable goods, which, believe it or not, could have a revolutionary impact on our economy moving forward. I really enjoyed this conversation, and it made me really think hard about where our economy might be in the next 5 to 10 years. So I think you'll find this a bit of a glimpse into the future. I enjoyed it, and I hope you do too. Mike, welcome to the Benson Wealth Podcast. It's great to have you on today.
It's great to be on the show. Thank you, Drew.
So I read your book, The Sharing Economy. I loved it. I thought it was extremely thought-provoking, and I'm excited about my listeners being able to hear a little bit from the author today. So let's start with the basics. What is the sharing economy?
What people call the sharing economy actually has two aspects. One is that many durable goods are underused, and so there's substantial potential to commodify excess capacity. So if I have a durable good that I'm not using, if we think of that as a commodity and I could sell part of it, then that would mean that I could have better quality durable goods because I would have other people also paying into it. So the first aspect is the commodification of excess capacity. Second is, for the first time in human history, it's possible to sell reductions in transaction costs. Now, in the book, I define transaction cost as having three aspects: triangulation, transfer, and trust. Triangulation is we have to be able to find each other. Transfer is we have to be able to deliver the good and service and secure payment seamlessly, maybe invisibly. And trust means I have to be able to rely on your assurances. So if you put those three things together, we get an example, and most people have some experience with this, of Uber. So Uber is, I have a car in a few minutes, and you need a ride. Is there some mutually beneficial transaction where I could commodify the empty front right seat or the whole empty back seat of my car? Now, the problem is, there are transactions cost in doing this. So I am ashamed to admit I have a shiny black BMW 330. I'm just the sort of asshat you think I am, coming up behind you in the left lane, flashing my lights. I think I'm better than you. So suppose I'm driving down the road. I see a young woman walking by the side of the road. I roll down my window. I say, "Hey, you need a ride?" The police get called. It's a thing. It's all creepy. But
Right.
In fact, she does need a ride, and I would be willing to sell some part of my time in the car.
Sure.
So we have to be able to find each other. We have to be able to make the payment and the negotiation for how much this service is going to cost. And she has to be able to trust me, and I have to be able to trust her that she's not going to rob me. Uber has solved all that in a way that's so seamless and transparent, we actually don't know that it's carrying out those three functions. But think of what it was like before to get a taxi. How does triangulation work? Well, I schlep myself out in the road and I wave my hand. Maybe the dude stopped, maybe he doesn't. Maybe there's no taxis at all.
Right.
There's also the problem of transfer, where I generally had to pay in cash. It's not clear that I'm really being charged the right amount. I may not be able to trust the person. I'm not sure the taxi driver is honest, and the taxi driver they have no idea who I am. They don't know my name, they don't know my financial information. Taxi driving is a pretty dangerous profession because they might get robbed.
Sure.
Uber solves all those problems, not perfectly. But the thing is that when it comes to the sharing economy, all you have to do is better than the status quo. And there are so many underused durable assets. I think that 50 years from now, people are going to look back at the current era and they're going to say, I think it's shocking that people were not just selfish but stupid, because we pay for everything twice.
Yep.
First, I pay for the durable good, and then I pay to store the thing instead of renting it out or sharing it and getting some of the benefits from that. So if you drive in New York, if you're driving around New York in lower Manhattan, there's a bunch of 3-lane roads. We're using 2 of those lanes, one on each side, to store empty cars. Some of the most valuable real estate in the world is being used to store empty cars. Suppose that all of those empty cars weren't there and all the cars that were there were moving around. We have fewer cars because we'll use them more intensively. And we have a lot more space available because we're making more efficient use of all of this durable capacity. So we don't need half as many cars. Most of them, most of the time, are not being used. I think it's been estimated between 60 and 70%. Most of the time, during the day, at night it's more. 60 or 70% of the cars in lower Manhattan at any one time are not being used. We're just storing them. The other example that other people have experience with is probably Airbnb. I have an apartment in Paris, London, New York. I mean, it's even worse. I go see a young woman on the street and I say, you want to stay in my apartment? No, she does not. That's creepy as hell.
It is creepy.
But in fact, young people do this all the time because we have solved the problem of triangulation, transfer, and trust. You know where the apartment is. You can look at reviews. You know my identity. And the payment is made by the app. So that was a pretty long answer. The summary is, sharing economy has 2 parts: the commodification of excess capacity and the selling of the reduction in transaction cost through apps on small mobile communication devices we call them phones, but that's not what they are.
So let's, that was a great description, and I appreciate you taking the time to explain it because I think it requires that. Now, I actually, ironically, Mike, was cleaning my garage this weekend of all the times, and I was reading your book throughout last week, and then there's like a voice version on Kindle where for some of your book I was listening to it and not reading it. And so I'm listening to it, and I'm cleaning my garage, and I got to the part where you talk about that the cost of a durable good. You use the example in your book of a power drill, which, for the record, I have like 6 of them, and I only use, I will say, I have a Milwaukee, and not to burst your theory, but I do have Impact Driver Milwaukee, and that I will probably never rent because that's my baby. But every other drill, forget about it. Like, I am totally down for getting rid of the other junky drills because I use them. To your point, I think you said the average drill is used, 40 minutes a year? Or 40 minutes, so it's useful lifetime. Right, that's what I meant to say. That is so true when I started looking at all these things in my garage that I either never use or I barely use, or I'm purchasing it on the assumption that I will need its services in the future. I'm got to assume there's a lot of durable goods sitting in people's garages that they literally never touched ever once, because I have a few of those. So I'm cleaning out your garage, and I want to add to your theory, and I want your feedback on this. There's actually almost a multiplier effect, sort of like the Keynesian multiplier. There's a multiplier effect when it comes to the cost piece, because it's not just the physical real estate of storing the goods. It's also the time to organize, the time needed to clean. We have pets, so I'm trying to always keep cats and dogs, even chickens, because I live in New Hampshire, and that's what we do. And I have a pickup truck, and I tend to be a little more aggressive with you little Beamer people, but whatever. But there's a lot of cost to just keeping the animals out of the garage. we had a situation where one of the cats was going and peeing near my tools. So it's not just the cost of storing it, it's the cost of time. And then there's a third component. I was just pontificating over the weekend. There's a third piece to it. It's also the opportunity cost of time spent elsewhere. So while I was spending my weekend cleaning my garage, now I'm an entrepreneur, Mike. So while I could have been spending valuable time building my business, right? That's probably a way more effective use of my time, particularly as an entrepreneur. Building my business, my two businesses, I was cleaning my garage, or in something even much more enriching, I could have been just enjoying my kids and my wife and enjoying the weekend. Instead, I was aggressively trying to clean the garage. So what are your thoughts on just all the layers of costs that actually come into the durable good itself?
One of the things that's interesting is that generally the reason we want the durable good is not the thing itself, but the services that it provides.
Yeah, I love
Now,
that.
I understand that your Milwaukee hammer drill, if the cat pees on that, that's the end of the cat.
It's over.
Yeah, I mean, fine with the cat, but don't pee on my Milwaukee.
Please don't.
But for the most part, what people want is not a drill. What they want is 2 holes in this wall right now.
That's right.
The way for me to get 2 holes in this wall right now, given the opportunity cost of my time of going and renting a drill, standing in line, getting the rental, filling out the form, using my credit card to pay for it, and then taking it back, I'm better off owning it. There's no reason that that has to be true, though. Suppose it were possible, and I described this at length in the book, suppose it were possible to rent a drill and have it delivered very quickly, and then I could return it. So I drill the 2 holes and I put the drill back. Now, there could be some people like you that own really excellent tools and you use them quite a bit, but not all the time. You don't want to rent it out because you're not sure that it will be returned in good form. But suppose that we built better, even more powerful drills that also had telemetry that would transmit information about how and when it was damaged, so that anyone who damaged it would be obliged to pay for it, and they'd have to have insurance and make good. They'd have to make you whole. You'd then be willing to rent it out. So you could imagine that some people would specialize in the ownership of 1 or 2 really valuable tools. They would rent everything else. I would then have an income stream, and I would own a drill that was better than I would ever have for myself. There's a number of people in cities that have much nicer apartments than they could ever afford because they rent it out maybe for the summer or August. I have a friend in Paris who rents out his apartment. It's in central Paris, a beautiful apartment. Rents it out for the entire month of August and gets 6 months worth of rent in 1 month from renting it out on Airbnb. So he has a much nicer apartment for 11 months and then goes on vacation as he would anyway. So I think that the multiplier that you're talking about is a good way to put it. Everyone's going to be better off. We'll have fewer of these things, and the ones that we have will be much better. And your garage, you can store your car and play with your kids because it is easy to get. You don't have to have all this stuff stored and organized. So once you start thinking in terms of sharing rather than owning, one of my heroes was Ronald Harry Coase, and most people don't know that the H stands for Harry. Harry's an unusual middle name. It might be short for Harold or Henry, but it's not. His name is actually Harry. So we've all learned something today. Ronald Harry Coase, in 1935, asked a really interesting question in the United States. He asked a bunch of corporate CEOs, if markets are so great, why are there firms? Because markets provide prices as a discovery mechanism. That's supposed to organize all of our activities. But in fact, most people don't come home at the end of the day and say, dang, prices were in a bad mood today. What they come home and say is, dang, my boss was in a bad mood today. So we have all these little command economies. If markets are so great, why are there firms? If Coase were alive today, he would say, why do we own stuff? The reason I put these 2 questions together is that the answer to both questions is the same. It's transaction costs. The reason why there are bosses instead of everything being done on the spot market is that using markets to buy and sell is expensive. It's okay for some things, but if it's a routine transaction that happens over and over again, it's better to have an employee. Likewise, if it's something that I routinely use, maybe I should own it. But if I only use it once in a while, I'm going to be better off renting it by quite a bit because I won't have to pay for it twice with those storage costs. So I think the new Kosian transaction cost question is, why do we own so much stuff? And I actually think that there's going to be a generational change in this. When you look at my Facebook page, and if I say Facebook page, you already know that I'm really old because I use Facebook. But if you look at my Facebook page, I have pictures of my car, my house, of things. If you look at my son's Instagram page, they have pictures of hang gliding in Nepal. They have experiences. They're doing things instead of cleaning out their garage. And so the generational change is, I think a lot of young people are going to be they want to be not encumbered by the ownership of management of big, large gobs of stuff. They want to be able to leave and go do something. Maybe they just rent everything, and that means that they can fairly quickly drop everything and go hang gliding in Nepal because they'll have money instead of having everything tied up in buying things and storing things.
Yeah, I think that's profoundly true, and I would say I'm sort of probably in the middle generation between you and your son, and I do see a dramatic shift so I'm at the older end of the millennial era. I'm 40, and I'm noticing a dramatic shift in preferences of where people are actually wanting to spend their money, where people used to buy toys, like particularly, so we're in New Hampshire, so you'll see a lot of ATVs and snowmobiles, where you'll see a lot of the older generations still doing a lot of the toy-based stuff and purchasing those things. I would say the younger generations are much more concerned about, hey, I want to go skiing with my family, or I want to go hang gliding, and the way in which they want to experience the world is definitely changing, and I think one could presume that the economy is going to follow suit. Can I step back for 2 seconds, though, Mike, because you and I take for granted that, some of these terms like transaction costs. Can you explain, just for the layman, because a lot of folks don't have a background in econ, can you explain simply what are transaction costs, and why was Ronald Coase so important in diagnosing that as a reason why certain goods or services are not emerging?
Adam Smith said that the cost of anything is the sum of its money price and the time and inconvenience required to acquire it. And so the cost of something is its monetary price. The transaction cost is all of the time and inconvenience required to acquire that thing. And so I gave the definition of transaction cost in my book as being triangulation, transfer, and trust, because then I'm actually talking about acquiring durable goods. But you're right to ask, what is the more fundamental definition that Coase would use? For Coase, transaction costs were the frictions. You should think of just as friction.
I like that.
The things that prevent people from being able to engage in mutually beneficial transactions. One of those is information. One of those is the lack of trust or the ability to negotiate in good faith to be able to rely on the other person's assurances. So it is kind of nebulous. But the way that I try to illustrate this, the simplest way I think to illustrate it, is I ask my students, Uber has surge pricing. That is, the price is variable depending on the number of cars available and how many want to use it. Does Starbucks have surge pricing? And they say, well, no. Well, really? So I spend a lot of time in the Atlanta airport because I live in the South. I fly every week. And if I die, going to heaven or hell, I'll have to go through Atlanta because all the planes to anywhere you have to transfer in Atlanta. So fairly often at 8:30 in the morning in Atlanta, I've made my first flight and I'll see the Starbucks and there's 70 people in line. And I think that's too expensive. I am not going to buy a latte.
That's the friction for you is time.
That's one. But it is an obvious illustration of one. Starbucks totally has surge pricing because it is the sum of the fixed monetary price plus the variable opportunity cost of time. And so the interesting thing is that the line probably stays about the same length. Somebody looks and says, I'm not going to stand in line for Starbucks. Then the line goes down a little bit. Somebody else shows up and they say, I am willing to stand in line. So the friction, the time and inconvenience, as Adam Smith said, required to acquire the thing, that's a cost that you have to pay. And so waiting in line is a great example of transaction cost. There's also information and trust, but a big one is waiting in line. If you as an entrepreneur can make it more convenient, because demand curves slope downwards. So what that really means is if prices go down, you can sell more. So if you're an entrepreneur, one thing you can do is try to make your product cheaper by improving your production process.
Okay.
But another thing you can do is make it more convenient to acquire that thing. So it is easy for me to buy it online and have it delivered rather than me schlepping to the store, waiting in line and buying that thing. So not surprisingly, web-based retail is knocking out bricks and mortar retail because the
That's right.
transaction costs are much lower. So when you think in terms of the total cost, which is the monetary price plus the time and inconvenience of acquiring that thing, if you can reduce the time and inconvenience of acquiring it, you'll sell more. And that's where the sharing economy is really coming from. That's where web-based commerce is coming from, is the recognition that I don't have to cut my monetary price. All I can do, and this is low-hanging fruit, all I have to do is make it more convenient to acquire this. I will sell more of that stuff. And in fact, whoever is best at that may be able to dominate the market. That's why Amazon is a giant.
So, again, going back to the garage situation, I was thinking about it. It's like, and I love the way you put it. Like, it's not really about the Milwaukee drill. It's about the feature services that it can provide. So we have an RV, and I was it's a trailer, and I was in the trailer last night cleaning up all these stink bugs, and it gets pretty gross.
You've had a rough weekend.
I know it's been a little bit tough. I am going golfing soon, so I think
I was worried.
I think I've earned a round of golf.
Yeah.
I'll say that. But I was in there last night and I used the drill. And again, and I was thinking about your book as I was doing this. I was like, that represented the ability for me to unscrew a section of the RV where I could actually. We haven't even de-winterized it, and so I was able to then go in and play with some of the valves to get the water heater, get water to flow into the water heater. But it's not about the drill. It was never about the drill. It's always been about its ability to eventually get me to spaces in my RV or drill holes in the wall so that I could do what I really want is an RV that's functioning, Mike.
Yeah.
And the drill represented to serve it. Right now, right this moment. The problem, to your point, are the frictions. So if I had to hop in my truck and drive all the way up past all the Beamers, if I had to drive all the way up to Lowe's, which is about 15 minutes from my house, 20 for most people, but for me, 15.
Yeah.
If I had to get up there, I would have been so frustrated because getting in the truck, telling my wife that I may not be able to eat with the family and I got to go get all this stuff. That's too much of a friction for me. That's the transaction cost. It's a transaction. Yep. It is a straight up cost. That's right. So, but I was thinking, man, if I could have clicked a button and 20 minutes later, all the stuff, if I could have gone on to like Amazon and I'm like, I need like ordering Uber Eats, right? It's like, well, we want quesadillas tonight and someone wants a burger and someone wants this. If I could just click the things and it showed up to my door, that would have solved a lot of my problems. So you see a world in which this is, very likely or very potential to happen. And so talk a little bit about the Ubers. Like, do you think a company like Uber, which is really, as you pointed out in the book, a technology company, a platform company, do you think they have the capacity, or someone of them has the capacity to drive down the transaction costs so that we start to rent versus own?
So in the Sharing Economy book, I talked about entities that I called platforms. Platforms are places. Transactions take place, but it can be a virtual place. So it used to be that there was a thing 3,000 years ago called the souk. And so in the Middle East, I would go to the souk. What does the souk sell? Nothing. The souk sells space in little stalls where if I want to sell something, I can go there and sell rugs, grain, whatever I want. It's up to me. I'm renting the space. I get to sell it. Then, this was before you were born, I realized, but there were things called malls. So maybe in suburban areas, there's a big...
I went to the mall as a kid.
Yeah. Before some of your listeners were born then.
That's true.
What does the mall sell? Nothing. They sell space for somebody to engage in transactions. Now, originally, Amazon was a bookstore. People forget that.
Yep.
What Amazon did was they sold books. But it turned out that that business model was easily adaptable. There's nothing important about books for that business model, for that online business model. So I just take out books and I put in all sorts of other stuff. So what does Amazon sell? Well, like the Sears catalog. The Sears catalog was the first virtual mall. Sears catalog didn't sell anything. What they sold was printed space for the representation, the virtual representation. Now it's analog, it's on paper, but
Sure.
the analog representation, here's a picture of a petticoat, here's a picture of a plow. I look at that, I can pay this price, and it will be delivered to me. Compared to living in rural Iowa or New Hampshire, where there's a local store and they've got 20 or 30 items, there's 10,000 items in the Sears catalog. I
Yep.
can buy any of those things and have them delivered. So Amazon's business model is they sell space, it's virtual, and it solves the three problems of triangulation. I can find the stuff, I can look it up, there's an index, there's a search function, transfer, I make the payment, they make the delivery, and trust, I can return the thing. Now, remember that Amazon sold books. What does Uber do? Careful. The first answer people want to give is, well, Uber is a taxi company. No. What Uber does is sell delivery. Right now, what Uber does is sell mostly delivery of human butts. Take your butt from one place to another. They also sell, they provide the delivery of food. And if you look up Uber but for, you can fill in a lot of words. Some cities have Uber but for kittens, where, I'm feeling bad, I can get a kitten for a couple of hours delivered by Uber. Uber, in fact, is a delivery company. So we think of Uber as being a competitor for taxi companies. That's not true. Uber is a competitor for Amazon. Amazon delivers things to be owned, and they can deliver stuff tomorrow. Uber can deliver stuff in 15 minutes. That's much better for the rental market. Uber has an enormous advantage. So soon, I think, Uber will start to expand, just like Amazon did beyond books. So Uber is going to expand beyond delivering humans or food or kittens, and be able to deliver tools and pick them up. There's all sorts of things that if I could get them very conveniently for just a few minutes and have it delivered very rapidly, 15 or 20 minutes. Now, this is not going to happen in rural New Hampshire. It means that we are looking at a mechanism that is going to cause an increased concentration and increased desire to live in urban areas for many people, because the frictions of urban living are going to be reduced. I can live in a place that has very few closets. I don't need a garage. I don't need storage space, because I can have all this stuff delivered very quickly. If I can have it delivered quickly and put it back, so I have a smart pod out in front of my house. It locks, it's secure. The Uber comes by, puts this thing in the smart pod. My phone buzzes and says, your thing is here. I go out and I get it from the smart pod. I put it back. The pod is smart. It knows, and it contacts a passing Uber driver. So this Uber driver is just making deliveries all over the place. The density of transactions is going to be really high. Suppose we're talking about that power drill. So in a given morning, 8, 10 people are all going to use that power drill for 15 minutes. I can pay for that power drill very rapidly. Now, admittedly, it's going to be used up faster, but I will start making more durable drills because they'll be used in this much more intensive fashion. So the bottom line is, I want to emphasize, Uber is going to go head to head with Amazon, not taxi companies.
That is very interesting. I mean, before your book, I'd never even thought of Uber, frankly, being in the same universe, other than the fact that it's, technology based. So that's thought provoking, Mike. Are you seeing any? Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Once you think that Amazon was a book company, and then one day they thought, there's no reason for us to be restricted to books.
So I had a professor, and I obviously would never name the person, but I had a professor back in the day, and their comment was, because I was in college around 2004 to 2008 was when I did my undergraduate work. And I had a professor, and I forget which year, but it was back when Amazon was still doing books. And he said Amazon is now expanding into other goods. And he said, lose your focus, lose your shirt was the comment that he made, which is a kind of an old marketing adage. And at the time, I didn't really know what to think of it. You know, I wasn't super engaged with the economy being a student. And fast forward, I think of that all the time when he said that. I was like, wow, was he dead wrong? Because
it's a great story.
Isn't it? Because what he got wrong, as I learned from your book, Mike, what he got wrong is Amazon was never a bookseller. They were never a bookseller. Amazon was merely a technology for people to acquire goods. That's it. It was a marketplace. It's really what it is.
There's a famous incident at the Harvard Business School. I've heard it told about a couple of professors, but the guy would always ask, and these were students in the executive MBA program, and the question is, what business are you in? And the person would give an answer, and the professor would say, you're just wrong. Go think about that. So one person famously said he was in the restaurant business. Now, he operated a large chain of seafood restaurants. And the professor said, go away, come back tomorrow, and tell me what you actually do. And the guy went away, came back, and said, I sell fish. Now, I sell fish in a particular form, but it has to be fresh. The main thing I have to do is fish. So what Amazon sold was reductions in transactions cost.
Yep. Not
books. And if you think about it, it was the mistake of your professor was not, oh, this can't happen. It was to not understand what it was that Amazon actually sold. So if you're thinking of operating a business, if you're thinking of starting something else, go for a walk in the woods where there's no distractions and think, what is actually my business? Because that mistake is perfectly understandable. If Amazon were a book company, it should have focused. They were not. They were a reductions in transactions cost company, and they did focus. They took his advice. He just misunderstood what business they were in.
That's right. Yeah, because I do agree with the phrase "lose your focus, lose your shirt." But to your point, they never really were a bookseller. They were being compared to Barnes and Noble, and that's really not what they ever were from the beginning. They're not a publisher.
Bricks and mortar. No, Barnes & Noble was a bricks and mortar store. Amazon was an online company that was selling things and having them delivered. And once you realize what their actual business was, so this may seem like kind of inside baseball, but your professor is right. Let me defend him. I am showing professor solidarity here.
Love it.
The misunderstanding was not thinking deeply about what the business is, and we could all profit from that. Go for a walk. What business am I in? And then focus on that.
So I did that experiment so I have a couple businesses. One is my core wealth management business where I take care of, basically do private wealth management, Mike, and I largely manage wealth for families. That's 90% of what I do. Now, I also have a parent company that we launched back in October with a business partner, Jason, who also runs a wealth management company. We've been doing this together but we've both been in this business for over a decade. And I was thinking about the other company in particular, actually both, but the other company, which is called True North Wealth Management Group. And I said, we're not in wealth management. It's really not what we do, especially on that side of the business, because we're not even directly managing money other than our individual practices, right? Like I actually manage money. I manage wealth for a living, so I trade on the daily basis. But for True North, I'm not really trading. And then what we're doing, Mike, is we are bringing over independent wealth advisors, so people that are at other firms, Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, Edward Jones, et cetera. They are captive employees in most of these firms. They're captive employees. They're W-2 workers. And so I was thinking about, okay, we've created we actually call our company a platform. In fact, if you listen to the beginning of this episode, if you rewind right now and go to the very beginning, one of the things I say in the intro is that we are a platform for independent wealth advisors. And I thought, why was I subconsciously calling this a platform? And it dawned on me because we're not really selling your old mom and pop wealth management financial services firm. What I really sell is the gig economy. Because what's happening, I'm going to go back to the hang gliding for a second because I like this. I think this is interesting and I want your feedback. When I think about what we do, a lot of people are tired of the 9 to 5. I'll share another story and then I'll get to my point, I promise. I remember being a brand new advisor, and I worked for a bigger firm back then. And I walked into the door, and to my prior firm's great credit, they gave us a lot of flexibility, and they, particularly when I started, they really treated me like an adult. So I showed up when I wanted to show up because I basically was largely making all my money on commissions. And so I walked through the door, and this old timer standing there, old attorney, right? And he looks at his watch, and all he does is he stares at me, and he taps his watch. And it ticked me off. I mean, I was actually really annoyed by it. And I thought about this later that day, and I even thought about this weekend, is what he doesn't understand is the normal 9 to 5, particularly for millennials and on down, and I frankly see it even with Gen Xers now too, people are wanting a different lifestyle. If I can get all my work done at a different time of the day, who cares? If I do all the trades in time for my clients, if I do all of my compliance and notes, if I call the advisors that work for me now, if I check in on them and I get all my work done, if no one's inconvenienced, then why am I married to the 9 to 5? The other thing that I'm noticing, Mike, is that people are tired of, in general, I see this in my industry, people are somewhat tired of working for a big firm and being an employee. They want out. So what do I sell? Sorry for the long answer. I sell freedom, and I sell the gig economy. That's all I do. That's what I am. What is your feedback on that, and any critique on the way I'm looking at this?
I've got nothing. It's a perfect example of transactions take place. Transaction is, if it's voluntary, simply an arrangement that makes at least two parties better off because it's voluntary.
Right.
So anytime you can have a voluntary transaction, it means that both of the parties to that transaction are better off. Platforms are settings where more and more of those transactions can take place because we've reduced the friction. What kind of transaction? I don't know. There's all sorts of different apps. As a professor, I know for a fact that I'm not going to be able to understand or even imagine the things that people are in a particular industry are going to be new arrangements that they're going to be able to devise to create a platform where they can sell space. Transactions take place. This is a place where people can find new ways to cooperate with each other. So I was in Australia once, and I was late for a meeting, and I had to decide whether I was going to take two different ride shares. There was Uber and one other one. Uber was more expensive. The other ride share was going to be a 15-minute wait. And I thought, wait, why isn't there Orbitz but for ride shares? Because think, what does Orbitz sell? Orbitz sells reductions in transactions cost to access reductions in transactions cost. So a hotel has a website, and I can learn price and whether they have any rooms available. It's much cheaper than calling them or going there. Orbitz curates those for me. And so I was thinking, well, why isn't there an app where I can look at all the available ride shares, look at the prices and wait times, and then pick the one that I want? That's how Orbitz sells airlines. I can go to the airline website, but Orbitz curates all of those. I have done this long enough that I thought, wait, I thought of this. An entrepreneur must have thought of it 5 years ago. And it's
Sure.
true. There are several of those rideshare curation apps. So there's all sorts of ways to think of platforms. You have thought of a way of providing an alternative where people are probably willing to accept maybe slightly lower salaries than they would get if, because the old guy, I love the old guy in your story. What is he selling? Well, his business is somebody, probably a white man in a suit, has to be in their office at their desk from 8:30 a.m. until 6 p.m. and take no more than half an hour for lunch, and they have to look pretty frustrated. If they are, we must be making money. That's stupid.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with anything. Those are all correlates of what used to be the way that they did business. Now you have someone who maybe doesn't come into the office. They're there sporadically, but transactions take place. There's a platform in which they find new and better ways to serve other people and get paid for it. So one of the things that people worry about profits, and you know this, if I make someone better off and I get paid as a result, we don't look at the improvement in the quality of life that someone gets from buying my product. All we see is, well, that person is making profits. Generally, profits are a sign that I have found new and better ways to serve other people. And so apps or platforms are a means of reducing the friction to allow human beings to act on their innate desire to serve others. That's the motivating force of capitalism. I want to serve other people. If I can also get paid for it, that's great. And so we are unshackling, we are unfettering this impulse that has motivated human beings for millennia. So bless you for having a platform.
Thank you. Thank you. I love it. I'll take any compliment I can get. I'll say this too. You said something that's near and dear to my heart, and it's one of those. I think every podcaster has like the thing that they always say every time, but I always talk about how profit seeking is actually one of the greatest sort of forces for being selfless. And I know that's counterintuitive to people, and I'm sorry if you're listening to this that I'm saying it again, but I'm going to say it again. If I have to divorce my personal values and not values, but preferences, I think it's a better word. If I have to divorce my preferences and I have to, and I want to provide something that somebody else wants, I have to think about their preferences and desires before I think about mine. Because the nature of being able to sell something, whether it's an independent wealth management platform, whether it's direct wealth management with my group, one of the questions I ask every prospective client, Mike, is, what are you looking for in an advisor? The reason I ask the question is because I actually genuinely just want to understand, can I help them, and what is it that they want me to do? When I was a new advisor, I used to just launch into all the things that I could do for them. And they're like,
Product.
Yeah, I was a sales guy. And I thought, man, I'm doing this backwards. And then I learned,
so many people get stuck selling products.
And that's a great lesson if you're an advisor and you're listening to this, or if you're an entrepreneur, you don't sell service, you don't sell products. That's not what you do. What you're doing is you're influencing people to make good decisions, and you need to listen to what they want first. And if they tell you what they want and you can provide it, you're making their lives material better. So I always felt like capitalism and the profit motive does lead to a virtuous cycle, but it's demonized. I want to talk about an example in your book. And remind me where this was, but I believe in the book you talked about there was a terrorist attack and the Uber drivers. Was that in Paris, or not Paris, but in the south of France?
Sydney. It was in Sydney, Australia.
Sydney. That's right. So it was in Sydney. And my understanding is the drivers were going into the town and they were charging more. But I'll just let you explain it. Explain the story, and then I want to talk about, you made a great comment after the story, but explain what happened there.
There was a bombing, and people were trying to get off of the peninsula and the island that make up Sydney. And so everyone leaving, the cars were just bumper to bumper. There were no cars coming in because people were worried. But a lot of people didn't have a way home, and so they tried to use Uber. And thousands of people were all using Uber at the same time. And so what appears to have happened is that Uber drivers were across the bay, across the river, two different bridges, and watching TV, and there's a terrorist attack. So imagine two people. One is, oh my goodness, that's a terrorist attack. I feel so bad for those people. I wonder what's on ESPN. Because, I just feel bad. I'm not going to do anything, but I honestly feel bad for them.
Yeah, so you're a good person.
Yes, that makes you a good person. An Uber driver sees it and says, wow, look at the price. The surge price has gone up to 5 times the normal price because there's way more people than cars. I'm going to get in my car and go over and pick somebody up because I can make a lot of money doing that. Now, who is the more moral person? A, the person who honestly feels bad for the misfortune of the people over across the bay, or B, the person who does something about it and provides the needed service. Well, surely we don't want to say person B is morally worse off. I want to say they're better off because they're actually doing something. The thing is, markets provide a context in which me acting in my own self-interest can provide even greater benefits to the person that I'm serving as a result of my self-interest. So the only cars coming in were emergency services and Uber drivers. They're going towards the sound, the flames. They're going towards the terrorist attack. Was it courage? Well, you can say it was not courage. Maybe it was self-interest. But the nice thing is that capitalism and markets induce a coincidence between my self-interest and the welfare of the community. Now, maybe there were some people who said, I'm just going to go over there and pick them up as a volunteer. But there's not enough. How do we know that? Because the surge price was still very high. If enough people had done it voluntarily, the surge price wouldn't have gone up. There were still many more people who wanted rides than were able to get them. And so if you want to say it would be better if people would do it voluntarily, yes. The capitalist system, the market system, economizes on the need for direct personal relationships and love. It gives you and me a commercial relationship that actually closely mimics what I would do if we had a personal relationship and I did it out of love. And you're willing to pay for that because you really need it. So maybe people would say it would be best if we all loved each other. Sydney has 2 million people in it. I don't know enough people to love all of those people.
Yeah.
But I do love the fact that I'm getting 5 times the normal price and I can provide a service that you are willing to pay for. That's the nice thing about it. It's a voluntary transaction. Now, maybe you can say, well, you're only taking advantage of the misfortune of the people because of the terrorist attack. Yes, I am. If someone's starving and I sell them food, I'm only taking advantage of the fact that they're starving. They're starving. They actually really need that food. And so that we shouldn't say you shouldn't be able to sell things to people who really need it. That's asinine.
It's this whole virtue signaling culture that we live in, right? And I think
But they're all person A. They're all person A. They're watching on TV, feeling bad and doing nothing. So there's no virtue in that.
There is no virtue, but they're going to signal it out to everyone.
Yep.
What a good person I am because I'm going to acknowledge that there's horror. Well, I think Adam Smith talked about, and I forget the situation, but people are more concerned about their part of their pinky getting cut off than they are if a whole group of people in China are murdered. I forget which country he was referencing, but the point was
China. It was a giant earthquake in China, kills 100 million people.
That's the scenario. Thanks for reminding me. It's been a while. So yeah, I think again, going back to your situation, one of the thoughts I had while I was reading that is all of the first responders are going in, and guess what? Those first responders are probably not making $0. They're making money, and I think we're quick to say, well, these people. You're not going to hear many people say that a first responder or an EMT is not a hero, right? They're going.
Oh, they're getting paid. They must be greedy bastards.
Yeah, exactly. So they are greedy bastards. So why is the Uber thing any different? And I think a lot about virtue, and I think one of the key components to virtue, this is definitely a biblical concept, is you can talk all you want, but it's not real, right? Like we can state all the virtuous things that we're going to do, but what true virtue looks like, what true good behavior is actually acting upon it's actually just doing it, for goodness sakes. And the Uber people that were getting people out of harm's way were actually doing it, and they weren't. I think you called them. I think you used navel gazer, and they weren't navel gazing, right?
Yeah.
So, let's talk about the unintended consequences for the last 15 minutes here. So, with this sharing economy, with this platform economy, I was thinking of Schumpeter, and then you referenced him in the book, and I really appreciated you talking about the concept of creative destruction. I'll briefly explain it, and then I want you to take it away. For a listener, what Schumpeter identified is that there can be disruptions to an economy in the short term when you have major innovations. So when the buggy was a major employer in the United States and globally, and so when the automobile was being created, what happened is that the buggy basically became obsolete. But what happened is the displacement of all these workers that no longer had jobs in the buggy making industry. They had to transition to maybe a new industry, possibly the automobile industry. But when you see massive changes like during the Industrial Revolution, there are costs in the short run that can dramatically affect people's living standards and ability to make money. And so that's creative destruction. I just wanted people to understand that. So Mike, to you, if we go through this new world of a platform economy in a much more serious way, the way you're describing it, we're going to be producing fewer goods conceivably. That to me spells major disruption. What are your thoughts on what this could look like for the economy? I know you don't have an exact crystal ball, but what do you think the ramifications of the creative destruction if we see this type of change?
I have an earlier book called Tomorrow 3.0 where I said the sharing economy is the third great economic revolution. So the first was the Neolithic, the move to fixed agriculture. The second was the industrial. Both of those were extremely disruptive. Many people were ripped away from what traditionally had been their culture, their lives. They all had to find something new. The problem is that economic revolutions don't care what we think about them. There's a logic that drives them. And so the Luddites, and I start the book with this example, the Luddites who tried to break the power looms that were going to take their jobs, ultimately they were doomed to fail. It doesn't make sense to have an individual working a hand loom in order to make really expensive clothing. The result was, because of the Industrial Revolution, Adam Smith actually talks about his example of the woolen coat. So he says hundreds of different work people who don't know each other all work together to make this woolen coat. And it is so cheap and it is such high quality that a workman can afford it, and it's better quality than a king could get 100 years ago. So the result of the Industrial Revolution was three things. First, the destruction of many traditional jobs that were inefficient and produced almost nothing and didn't frankly produce much income, because the income that people had to be used to buy what was not available, which is the second thing, cheap products. This was so widely spread that the third thing, before only kings could have this, now everyone had manufactured clothing rather than burlap rags. So the result of the Industrial Revolution was that everybody now had manufactured cloth clothing that's pretty nice. The difference between the rich and the poor shrunk. It shrunk because of the Industrial Revolution. So many people lost their jobs. They found different jobs. They're now able to buy inexpensive manufactured clothing that looks a lot like what the wealthy wear. Now, the wealthy have more expensive fabric, it's newer, but the difference between what wealthy people and poor people had was reduced. So it used to be, say, in 1890, I have this really amazing horse and carriage. It's very expensive. You're poor. Your butt is walking. Now it's 1990. I'm rich. I have a really expensive BMW 700 series, and you have a Toyota. The difference has shrunk. I mean, admittedly, my BMW 700 is, I keep coming to the BMWs, I'm sorry. But I have this big, beautiful it's a $100,000 car. Your Toyota's used, you bought it for $4,000. We're both in cars. Both of them will go the speed limit. They both have air conditioning. So the difference actually shrinks pretty dramatically. So the fact that prices fall is the offsetting factor for many people losing their jobs, because when they find a new job, they can now buy so much more and better things. So I always ask my students a question, and none of them get it right. What country in the world lost the most manufacturing jobs between 1990 and 2010? The answer is China, by an order of magnitude. So in 1990, a factory in China is 1,000 women with sewing machines. In 2010, a factory in China is 7 people working in automated textile and apparel manufacturing machinery. So 993 people lost their jobs in China, and they're producing 100 times as much stuff. They're selling it much cheaper in the United States. That increase in productivity was so great that all of the 993 people found other jobs in new, much more efficient and productive manufacturing facilities. So almost all of the jobs in China have been wiped out 10 times over. They just, because of capitalism, because of their move to capitalism after 1974 and Deng Xiaoping, they moved to having a capitalist system of production and allocation of resources. China, by becoming capitalist, lost a whole bunch of jobs because of creative destruction. Now, those weren't good jobs. I'm sitting in a room making clothing with a sewing machine, making a pittance, barely subsistence. Now I can have an apartment, I have a motorcycle, I have a washing machine, all because of capitalism. But it's because all of those old bad jobs were wiped out. Now, it does require a certain flexibility and suppleness of mind. I admit that there's a challenge. Maybe I graduated from high school, I've been working for General Motors, and now General Motors closes because they suck. Well, I've got to find some kind of new job, and I'm not going to be able to find something that is that pays nearly as much. I don't have any training. It is difficult for people to face that problem. So the all this cashes out. In terms of economic benefits, we all get way better, cheaper products. Many of us now have the flexibility to have different sorts of job situations. We don't have to work at the office. Maybe we can work from home. We have a variety of different opportunities. For some people, though, there's a sense of economic precariousness that cashes out as a susceptibility to political demagoguery. So I think the real problem is not economic, but democratic. It is likely that we're going to see political demagogues start to take advantage of this sense of precariousness that people have. And understandable, I perfectly understand the sense of fury at having been left out. There's so much of an increase in wealth. Other people have all kinds of things. I'm
Right.
either not working or I'm working at the bottom of the economic pyramid, and I'm looking for somebody to blame. And some political demagogue, and I'm not trying to make a partisan point, it could be anything, but I say the real problem here is so and so, vote for me. So that
Yep.
there is a potential democratic problem because of this sense of economic precariousness.
Well, and I think that it definitely was, very heightened during the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah,
I mean,
yes,
people were
absolutely.
adamantly, advocating for an agrarian way of life, and it did
Yeah,
fundamentally change cultural values and the way in which we lived and interacted with each other in the world and goods and services. And I mean, if you were to walk through an art museum, I forget where we were. It might have been Washington D.C. or London. We were going through an art museum, and there was a picture of there's just a picture of like a beautiful pasture, and I forget who the artist was. And then there was a factory placed right in the middle of this serene. Like that was in the arts, a visual demonstration of their frustration and anger about where the world was heading. And they
yeah,
definitely were being demagogue, not only in the arts, but especially with politicians. And I
yeah,
think you continue to see that today with both major parties. I try, like you, to be I'm very apolitical on this podcast, but you're seeing this level of demagoguery that's already occurring, and a demagoguery of capitalism as a system with a really poor understanding of what it's done for the world's impoverished. It's been the greatest single force for lifting people out of poverty, particularly for the last, I would say, 100 years. And we would not be at the place where we are now if it wasn't for open markets, more markets, more markets, more markets. That's the way that you make people's lives better, and it's good for the poor. So one of the thoughts, though, that I had, and I'm curious on your perspective on this, is there's a fundamental difference, though, that I was trying to wrap my head around. Now, I'm sanguine. I think that other jobs will form that are not based in the production of goods, right? So you're going to have more tech-based jobs. So I'm confident. I'm not one of these believers that, well, if we go down these technological advances, we're just going to be run by robots and there will be no jobs, because that's tangibly never actually happened. There's no experience where there's less jobs after innovations when all the dust settles. The one thing, though, that's interesting about this is and you acknowledge this in your book, and during the Industrial Revolution, that we created more goods where before we were creating fewer goods. This is a reversion in the sense, Mike, based on your theory, that we would then be creating fewer goods, right? Because we don't need as many. We need better power drills, but we might need 1/100th of the amount of power drills. So have you thought through what would be the implications of a world? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but what is a world in which the world economy has been so based on the production of these goods? If all of a sudden we're creating 1/100th of it, I feel like that could have a pretty disruptive impact on the global economy. That could be even worse than the way it disrupted things during the Industrial Revolution. What are your thoughts on that?
I could talk for an hour, and if I'm not stopped, I will about this. So I will try to be brief and limit myself
Okay.
to two observations.
Sure.
Um, First, the thing to remember is that we will need fewer tools. We will need fewer drills, hammers, saws, but they'll be of better quality. That means that people who cannot now afford tools will be able to rent them. It will make everyone more productive. So having cheaper access to tools ought to increase rather than decrease my ability to participate in the economy. And so that now it does mean that people are going to have to try to find some kind of activity, and we haven't used this word yet, but they're called gigs. And so there's actually one industry in the United States that has been exemplifying the advantages of the gig economy for a long time, and that's movies in Hollywood. So if I'm going to make a movie in Hollywood, let's suppose that I'm going to have an 8-week production schedule. There's about 170 different disciplines in the guild rules. So there's the gaffer, the key grip, the oddly named best boy. I don't want to know really what that means. There's a bunch of things that you do in order to make a movie, 170 different ones. Now, these aren't firms. What I need to do is I go on LinkedIn or I go on some platform and I secure the services of all 170 of these different people. Day one, since they're all experienced, and I know that because of their reputations on these apps, I can look at the reviews. They have a resume where I can say they're actually productive. Day one, 170 of them fit together. They articulate like a team. If I wanted a baseball team, I would hire 8 different position players and a couple of pitchers. If I want to make a movie, I hire 170 different people for 8 weeks, and they on that gig they make $30,000 or $40,000. At the end of the movie, it breaks up and then it reforms, reshapes like a kaleidoscope into a new short-term firm to make the next movie. So those are gigs. If I get 2 of those a year, I make $80,000. Some people make 10 times that. So if you really have a specialty that's in demand, you may make quite a bit more than that. I think that instead of having full-time jobs, which we've already established, people don't actually like.
We talked about this already, right?
Well, James Taylor has this great song about cotton mills. Mill work, it ain't easy. Mill work, it ain't hard. Mill work, it ain't nothing but an awful boring job. So this nostalgia for these jobs that sucked, really bad jobs where you have to work 50 or 60 hours a week in really bad conditions, that's not utopia.
No.
Utopia is I have more control, more autonomy, and I get to work gigs. People are going to have to, though, use some sort of creativity and imagination to find out what they're good at. But they can construct themselves. Maybe I have some tools and I can use those tools in a particular way. So maybe I'm a plumber. Maybe I can make really good cheese. And so I think that what we're going to see is the return of a lot of artisanal foods that used to exist, didn't exist because of the emphasis on mass production and low price, and then the ability to produce those things at low price and have them delivered. So I've actually spent a fair amount of time in New York City. My son was a PhD at NYU, and sometimes we would go online and get some designer pickles from a place in Brooklyn.
Sounds awesome.
So there's some place in Brooklyn right now where bearded young men wearing flannel, well, and bearded young women wearing flannels, a bunch of people with beards are in Brooklyn, and they're making maple bacon garlic pickles, and it's $12 for a small jar. But instead of having to get on the subway and schlep to Brooklyn, buy them and come back, I can order them and they'll be delivered in an hour. I'm willing to pay $12 plus an hour of doing something else for those pickles. I'm not willing to pay $12 plus go over, buy them, and come back. So once you start to think in those terms, there's all sorts of milk, cheese, food, where people can be their own little pop-up restaurant. All I have to be able to do is have an online presence. My ability to reach people cheaply, many people, is much less. And in fact, if someone says this is really great, the reviews will just propagate. So I think the fact that we've reduced the transactions cost of doing what you want, for many people who didn't want these awful jobs in the first place that we're now eulogizing as, oh, it's such a shame that those jobs are gone. No, they were terrible jobs. Thank goodness that those are gone. But it does mean that now people are going to have more personal responsibility for defining themselves. Here is what I am. Here is what I do. But it's also an opportunity. For most people, this is going to be great.
I love all the points, and I definitely see a shift in preferences. Like, for instance, I'm noticing more people buying fewer suits but wanting them tailored, buy nicer fabrics. Yeah. I'm also noticing people, like the cheese thing. I actually interviewed a gentleman named Cole Snell who it works in he's launching a life insurance. It's a platform predicated on the securitization of life insurance, which is right in vogue with a lot of what you said today. You know what he did before? He basically helped people, grocery stores, gain access to really high quality cheeses. That's what he did. And
friction.
So
he reduced the friction. They're not cutting the monetary price; they're reducing the cost of acquiring it.
Interestingly, he said he went to one of the local Whole Foods. He was living in Canada at the time. He's a Canadian. He's like, they didn't have access to the best cheeses, and there was like a farm not even that far away. And he's like, and it's this serene place, and you go and you walk through this beautiful field. You can meet the farmer, and then you can get this incredible cheese. He was actually a naturopathic doctor and was prescribing this as a way to do gut healing. Yeah. But he was reducing frictions, and yeah. I do see people wanting to go back to some. There are some nostalgic, romantic things. Like, I was in France not that long ago with my wife, and we were going through these old towns, and we were having cheese there. Yeah. And that old part of France and the nostalgia that it brings with the cuisine is a lovely thing. But I wouldn't have wanted to work in a coal mine back then, right? Which was employing a lot of people throughout the world.
I have French friends. When they come to the U.S., they say, "What is wrong with you people?" I go to the grocery store. There's no cheese. There's a bunch of different varieties of packaged plastic, but there's no cheese. And right. Making cheese is not that hard. I know there's people in the U.S. Why can't we buy it?
There's friction.
It's friction and transaction cost. And
transaction costs.
There's so many different dimensions where once we start to chip away at that, it's going to be possible for people who are now isolated to participate in at least a regional and maybe national economy.
So I know we're a little over time. Can I steal 5 more minutes? Because I want to make a couple observations, and I want to ask you a final question. So two of the things as you were talking I was thinking about is I think wealth, we try to put really hard definitions on what wealth is. And the way I look at wealth is we have money in your 401k in your bank account. Money is a technology that allows you to purchase experiences in life that you desire, right? And so when you talk about the gig economy, which, by the way, I view the business I'm creating as part of the gig economy, right? Like, I'm trying to create a freer lifestyle. And I want to make another – I'm losing my original point, so I'll scrap it for a second. Another thing on the gig economy is that we think a gig economy in terms of taxi drivers or a grip in the production of a movie, but I actually think the gig economy is going to start hitting attorneys, doctors, wealth managers like myself, because what I'm seeing is a desire to have a bit more flexibility. I mean, my industry, for instance, say you just want to be a part of an organization where you want to work 4 days a week, or 4 days a month, or maybe 1 day a week, and you make a set amount of money, or there's just like maybe it's you come in and you work for an organization and you help manage a client's portfolio for that one time. I could envision a world in which people will just show up for a day, or an attorney's like, hey, there's like high demand right now for writing wills and trusts or some other service. They'll just show up and do the job, and then they'll leave. I can conceive of a gig economy not just for sort of the more laboring jobs, but also for these higher quality jobs. But when I think about wealth, back to my wealth point, I'm all over the place right now, Mike. When I think about wealth, I think people are rethinking what a wealthy lifestyle looks like. And to your point, and you made this earlier, it's not just about acquiring goods. I think it's about experiences for people, which is shifting. We're really seeing a massive shift in the economy. The other point I wanted to make is that this has an environmental impact. I think one of the greatest things for the environment, think about, there's a book, More from Less. I think the last name of the author was McAfee. He makes a profound point that we're using fewer resources and we're producing way more goods. And it's actually been declining while population's been going up, which was a really thought-provoking book. But in your situation, this is going to radically increase our capacity to we're not going to need as many natural resources. So this is going to be one of the greatest benefits for the earth, in my opinion, and one of the greatest things for the environment. And usually people don't understand this. That's what markets and capitalism do. They give us cleaner air, cleaner water, and we utilize fewer resources. Don't you agree?
Yes. So there is, and I can't remember the name of the acronym. There's something that people call themselves. There was an article in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago about this, where people work really hard for 15 years and then retire. And their argument is that by doing that, they're actually more wealthy. So the point is that if I have enough to live on, then that actually is what wealth is, because then I can afford to go and do those things, even if I'm not spending that much money. What I want is flexibility and autonomy.
Correct.
And so if a wealthy person is not necessarily one who has a lot of liquid assets.
Correct.
A wealthy person is someone who is able to achieve their objectives and do it consistently. Now, we think of money as being correlated with that, and that's not wrong. Obviously, money helps a lot with that, and it takes a certain minimum amount at least. But when Adam Smith wrote about the wealth of nations, his definition of wealth was access to consumer goods and experiences that you wanted. Because the emphasis just on money is the Midas fallacy. If all I have is a bunch of gold and everything that I touch turns to gold, I can't actually consume anything. And so we have a chance to increase the wealth in Adam Smith's sense by having access to the sharing economy. So the thing that you said before that I wanted to take up that I think is really important, the Neolithic change meant that we could produce a lot more stuff. People were worse off, and often what it enabled was that we had 1,000 times as many people, because division of labor meant farming. We had a lot more ability to produce food, but the average quality of life fell. The Industrial Revolution, we produced a lot more stuff. The average quality of life went up after a while because I could get access to more stuff, but it really was hard on the environment. We started using resources at a rate that was just unsustainable. We started polluting the atmosphere. So the big factory in the middle of the field, it just changes the way that we live. Now, for the first time, we're going to be able to do more with less. And the book that you cited, I think, is really important. It's a really interesting idea, because it's mostly empirical. That book is mostly empirical. It shows that we're able to produce more with less. Our use of resources is less. So here's the thing. We have plenty of stuff right now. It's in the wrong place. We have more than enough stuff. What we need to do is make more efficient use of it. So like the streets in New York that I was talking about, we have plenty of space. We're just using it to store parked cars. Don't do that.
Yeah.
So if we start making better use of the space and resources that we have now by using them more intensively rather than extensively, until now we've gone on the extensive margin, make more, throw it away. What we need is to move on the intensive margin. This is entirely in keeping with a lot of environmental goals. I think the left should jump on this. So we can consume more and produce less. It is possible for us to have much more access to things, to tools, to experiences, and produce much less, all at the same time. So economists have a notion of wealth called real wages. The real wage is the ratio of what it says on my paycheck divided by the price level. Because I want to use my wage to buy stuff. I don't just like the numbers. I want to use my wage to buy stuff. So what's going to happen as we make less stuff is that wages are going to fall. What's going to happen as we can rent and share things is that prices are going to fall. If prices fall by more than wages, so what you and I, the pessimistic view is we have emphasized wages are going to fall. I think that's true. However, prices are going to fall. My wealth is going to increase because prices are going to fall by more than my wage. And we have a sort of monetary illusion. I want the number to be big because that makes me feel awesome. Well, if the numbers that make up my wealth fall, but my access to the things that I want increases by more, my wealth is actually increased. So it is likely that for most people, prices are going to fall because I can rent rather than own. I can share in a lot of different ways as the gig economy and apps and platforms start to make this possible. So I'm optimistic that wealth is going to increase for most people because you can't forget prices are going to fall. And the price is the sum of the money cost and the cost and inconvenience of acquiring it. So as transactions costs are reduced, I'm going to be able to get access to a lot more stuff.
Mike, this has been an awesome discussion. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today.
It was a pleasure. Thanks so much.
I hope we can do it again.
Please.
If you've enjoyed this content and you're looking for a wealth advisor, or if you're a financial advisor and you're looking to make the jump to the independent side, please message me on LinkedIn. Or you can email me at drew.benson@bensonwealthmgt.com. Or lastly, you can call my office at 603-316-2544. Securities offered through Raymond James Financial Services, Inc., member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services are offered through Raymond James Financial Services Advisors, Inc. Benson Wealth Management and True North Wealth Management Group are not registered broker-dealers, and they are independent of Raymond James Financial Services. The foregoing information has been obtained from sources considered to be reliable, but we do not guarantee that it is accurate or complete. It is not a statement of all available data necessary for making an investment decision, and it does not constitute a recommendation. Any opinions are those of myself and not necessarily those of Raymond James. Expressions of opinion are as of this date and are subject to change without notice. There is no guarantee that these statements, opinions, or forecasts provided herein will prove to be correct. Investing involves risks, and you may incur a profit or loss regardless of strategy selected.